When you disappeared, something far more powerful than words happened. Not because silence is a tactic, not because ignoring someone is a game, but because your absence exposed a truth that constant presence never could. When you were always there, replying fast, explaining yourself, checking in, trying to fix what went wrong, you unknowingly made yourself predictable. And predictability, especially when driven by fear of loss, slowly drains attraction. The moment you stopped doing that, the emotional landscape changed. Not on the surface, but deep underneath, where value is measured. Your absence forced a recalibration. She no longer had access to your attention on demand. She could no longer assume that no matter what she did, you would still be there waiting, still available, still trying. And that shift is uncomfortable because it removes certainty. Human beings don't miss what they fully control. They miss what they suddenly realize they may have lost. The silence didn't beg for her attention, it quietly took it away, and that's what made her feel the change. See, when you chase, you communicate one thing very clearly: I need you more than you need me. Not because you say it, but because your behavior reveals it. Explaining your intentions, defending your feelings, asking for closure, sending long messages that go unanswered, all of that positions you lower in the emotional hierarchy. It makes her feel safe, but not drawn. Comfort without respect never creates desire. When you stop chasing, you stopped reinforcing that imbalance. And here's the part most people misunderstand. She didn't come back because you ignored her. She came back because you reclaimed your center. Absence only works when it's real, when it's backed by a decision to step into your own life instead of orbiting someone else's. When you walked away, not in anger, not to punish, but because you refused to abandon yourself any longer, that decision echoed louder than any emotional appeal ever could. In your absence, she had space to reflect. Not on your words, not on your promises, but on how you made her feel. And without your constant presence smoothing over every moment of doubt, the emotional contrast became sharper. She remembered the strength you had before you started overgiving. She felt the difference between a man who chooses and a man who waits. That contrast is powerful because it reframes everything. Silence also does something else. It removes emotional noise. Arguments, explanations, justifications, reassurances, all of that creates distraction. When it stops, what remains is raw perception. And what she perceived was a man who didn't collapse when ignored, a man who didn't chase validation, a man who could walk away without announcing it. That steadiness registers as strength, even if she can't explain it in words. This is why absence works only when it's authentic. If you're silent but still watching, still hoping, still pausing your life for her return, nothing truly changes. But when your absence is backed by forward motion, by self-respect, by growth, by emotional independence, it creates a gravitational pull. Not because you want her back, but because you no longer need her to feel whole. And that's the truth most people don't want to hear. The moment you stopped trying to be chosen, you became someone worth choosing again. The moment you chose self-respect over desperation, everything shifted at a deeper level. Not because you announced it, not because you demanded better treatment, but because your behavior quietly changed the rules of engagement. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't argue, beg, or explain itself. It simply draws a line and stands still. And when you finally stopped crossing your own boundaries just to keep someone close, that decision spoke volumes. Desperation shows up when you tolerate what hurts you in the name of connection. When you accept mixed signals, unanswered messages, or emotional distance, and still stay available, you teach someone how to treat you. Every time you overextend, you reinforce the idea that your time, energy, and emotional well-being are negotiable. But the day you stop doing that, the day you decide that access to you must be earned, the dynamic changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Self-respect doesn't try to convince someone of your value. It assumes it. And that assumption is powerful because it removes the need to perform. You no longer rush to respond to prove interest. You no longer over-explain to avoid misunderstanding. You no longer sacrifice your peace just to avoid silence. That calm restraint sends a message far stronger than any emotional appeal. I value myself enough to walk away from what doesn't honor me. What's important to understand is that self-respect introduces consequence. Not punishment, not revenge, consequence. When someone realizes that their indifference no longer has unlimited access to you, it forces awareness. Suddenly, choices matter. Behavior has weight. And that awareness can be unsettling because it exposes the imbalance that existed before. When you were always accommodating, always forgiving, always available, there was no urgency to change. Self-respect introduces that urgency without saying a word. And here's the subtle truth: self-respect creates safety, not in the way people usually think, but in a deeper emotional sense. It signals stability. It shows that you are grounded enough to say no, strong enough to lose someone rather than lose yourself. That kind of emotional integrity is rare. It tells her that you are not driven by fear, that you are not seeking validation to feel complete. And that steadiness becomes deeply attractive because it contrasts sharply with the chaos of insecurity. When you stop chasing, not because you're hurt, but because you're done compromising your dignity, you stop negotiating your worth. You no longer accept crumbs and call them effort. You no longer rationalize disrespect as misunderstanding. You simply step back, and that step back forces reflection. It creates a moment where she has to confront a version of you that isn't bending anymore. That version is unfamiliar and compelling. Self-respect also shifts how you carry yourself in every interaction. Your words become measured. Your silence becomes intentional. Your presence feels earned, not guaranteed, and people respond to that shift, whether they want to or not. It changes the emotional tone of the connection. She may not consciously identify it as self-respect, but she will feel the difference. She will feel that you are no longer trying to hold on to her, you are holding on to yourself. And that's when return becomes possible, not because you lowered your standards, but because you finally raised them. Not because you waited patiently, but because you refused to wait indefinitely. Self-respect doesn't chase someone back into your life. It creates the conditions where only those who value you can come back at all. You didn't become distant, you became dignified. And that dignity is what made you impossible to overlook. When certainty disappears, curiosity takes its place. That's not a strategy, it's human nature. As long as someone knows exactly where you stand, exactly how you feel, and exactly how available you are, there's no emotional tension. Everything feels settled, familiar, and controlled. But the moment that certainty is removed, the mind starts to wander. Questions arise, and questions create emotional movement. That's the space where curiosity grows. Before, she didn't have to wonder about you. Your intentions were clear, your availability consistent, your emotional position predictable. She could assume your presence without thinking about it. And assumptions are dangerous because they make people stop paying attention. But when you stopped reaching out, stopped checking in, stopped offering reassurance, the emotional script changed. Suddenly, there was no clear narrative to rely on, and that absence of narrative creates curiosity, not out of manipulation, but out of disrupted expectation. Curiosity is born when control is lost. When someone realizes they no longer have access to the same version of you, their mind starts filling in the gaps. What is he doing now? How does he feel? Has he moved on? Those questions don't come from love or regret at first, they come from uncertainty. And uncertainty is powerful because it forces engagement. The mind hates open loops, it wants closure. And when you don't provide it, curiosity keeps pulling attention back to you. This is why over-availability kills attraction. When you are always present, always responsive, always emotionally transparent, there's nothing left to discover. Mystery isn't about hiding who you are, it's about not overexposing yourself to someone who hasn't earned full access. When you step back, you didn't become cold, you became less readable, and that subtle unreadability reignited interest. Curiosity also challenges the story she told herself. When you were chasing, it was easy to categorize you as someone who would always be there, someone who needed her more than she needed you. That story gave her emotional leverage. But when you removed yourself from that role, the story no longer fit. And when a narrative breaks, the mind works overtime to rewrite it. That rewriting often includes revisiting memories, re-evaluating moments and questioning past assumptions. In that process, feelings resurface. What makes curiosity even stronger is that it can't be forced. You didn't demand attention. You didn't ask for answers. You didn't explain your absence. You simply lived your life. And that nonchalance is disarming. It suggests that your world didn't collapse without her, that your happiness wasn't dependent on her validation. That realization can be deeply unsettling, because it removes the sense of importance she once felt by being needed. Curiosity is also tied to fear of loss. Not fear in a dramatic sense, but the subtle awareness that something familiar may no longer be available. When access is gone, value is re-evaluated. The mind starts to weigh what was taken for granted. And that evaluation often leads back to you, not because you called her back, but because your absence made her look. And here's the key distinction: curiosity doesn't mean she suddenly knows she wants you. It means she no longer knows where she stands with you. That uncertainty is what opens the door. It creates the emotional pause where reaching out becomes an option again. Not because you tried to provoke it, but because you stopped preventing it. You didn't pull her back with words. You left space for her thoughts to find you on their own. There comes a point where words stop working. No matter how clearly you explain yourself, no matter how sincere your intentions are, no matter how many times you try to make someone understand how you feel, it doesn't move the situation forward. Arguments turn into loops. Promises lose their weight. And the more you talk, the more you reveal how invested you are in an outcome you can't control. That's when growth becomes the only language left that actually speaks. When you stopped arguing your case and started improving your life, something fundamental changed. You redirected energy away from persuasion and into progress. Instead of trying to prove your value, you lived it. And that shift is powerful because it doesn't ask for permission or approval. Growth doesn't explain itself. It shows up quietly, consistently, and unmistakably. Growth is visible even when nothing is said. It shows in how you carry yourself, how you respond, or don't respond, to situations that once triggered you. It shows in your focus, your discipline, your emotional regulation. When you stop reacting and start evolving, people feel it. And that kind of transformation can't be debated away. It can't be dismissed as manipulation or desperation. It stands on its own. Arguments keep you emotionally tied to the past. They replay old wounds, old misunderstandings, old dynamics. Growth pulls you forward. It signals that you are no longer stuck in what happened. You are becoming something new. And that forward motion is deeply attractive because it introduces contrast. She remembers the version of you who was frustrated, defensive, trying to hold things together. And now she sees, or senses, a version who is grounded, composed, and moving ahead regardless of who's watching. What makes growth so compelling is that it changes the emotional atmosphere without confrontation. You're no longer asking for clarity or closure. You're no longer trying to win someone back through logic or emotional appeal. You've accepted that understanding can't be forced, and that acceptance creates calm. Calm is rare. Calm feels safe. And calm often draws people back in, not to argue, but to understand what changed. Growth also removes resentment from the equation. When you channel pain into self-improvement, you stop needing someone else to validate your experience. You no longer look to her for acknowledgement of what went wrong. You've processed it on your own, and that independence is felt. It shows that you're not carrying emotional baggage into the present. You're lighter, clearer, stronger. There's another layer to this that often goes unnoticed. Growth redefines the stakes. When your life expands, new goals, new routines, new confidence, your absence becomes more noticeable. It's no longer just silence, it's a visible shift in trajectory. She doesn't just miss your presence, she senses that she may no longer fit into the life you're building. And that realization can be jarring because it introduces urgency without pressure. You didn't grow to impress her. You grew because staying the same was costing you too much. And that authenticity matters. People can feel the difference between performative change and genuine evolution. Genuine growth doesn't seek applause. It seeks alignment, and alignment is magnetic. When growth replaces argument, respect returns. Not because you demanded it, but because you became someone who no longer needs to fight for it. You didn't win her over by saying the right things. You changed by doing the right ones. Attraction doesn't respond to availability the way comfort does. Comfort grows when someone is always there, always ready, always accessible. But attraction follows a different rule. It moves towards strength, direction, and self-sufficiency. When your life revolved around being available, when your schedule bent around her time, when your emotional state depended on her responses, the connection may have felt close, but it wasn't compelling. The shift happened when you stopped centering your life around someone else. Independence changes how you are perceived because it changes how you relate to yourself. When you are constantly available, it sends an unspoken message that nothing else in your life takes priority. That message slowly erodes desire. Not because caring is wrong, but because over-availability removes tension. It eliminates the sense that being with you is a choice among many meaningful options. When you reclaimed your independence, you reintroduced that choice. Independence isn't distance for the sake of distance. It's fullness. It's having goals, routines, responsibilities, and passions that exist whether or not someone else is watching. When you began investing your time and energy into your own direction, you stopped waiting to be included. You started moving. And movement is attractive. It suggests purpose. It signals that your life is going somewhere, with or without her. What's important here is that independence restores balance. When one person is always available and the other is selective, the dynamic becomes lopsided. The one with fewer options holds the emotional weight. But when you step back into your own life, the balance shifts. You are no longer trying to secure attention, you are offering presence. And presence feels different when it's not guaranteed. Emotions respond to contrast. When you were always there, your presence blended into the background. It became expected. When you became less available because your life was fuller, your presence gained weight. Time with you felt intentional. Moments mattered more. And that shift is felt emotionally, even if it's never articulated. Independence also removes pressure. When someone senses that you don't need them to complete you, they feel freer to choose you rather than manage you. There's no unspoken obligation, no emotional burden. That freedom paradoxically increases attraction because it replaces obligation with desire. She's no longer responding to need, she's responding to strength. Another layer of independence is emotional self-regulation. When your happiness isn't tethered to someone else's behavior, you become steadier. You don't react impulsively. You don't seek reassurance constantly. That emotional consistency creates safety, and safety paired with strength is one of the most powerful combinations in attraction. When you stopped being endlessly available, you didn't become cold or detached. You became selective. You chose where to invest your time and energy. That selectivity communicates value. It says that your attention is meaningful because it's not unlimited. And people tend to value what feels earned. This is why independence reignites attraction without effort. You're no longer trying to be interesting, you are interested in your own life. You're no longer waiting to be chosen, you're choosing yourself. And that choice changes how others see you. You didn't pull away to be missed. You stepped forward into your own life, and that's what made you magnetic again. The final shift happened the moment how you saw yourself changed. Not how she saw you, not how others perceived you, but how you internally defined your own value. That shift is subtle, almost invisible, yet it's the most powerful one of all. Because when your self-perception changes, everything else follows. Your tone changes, your boundaries change, your reactions change. And people feel that difference instantly, even if they can't explain why. Before, your sense of worth may have been quietly tied to her responses. A message replied to meant relief. Silence meant doubt. Attention felt like validation. Distance felt like rejection. And when your self-image depends on someone else's behavior, you unknowingly hand them control over your emotional state. The moment you broke that pattern, the moment you stopped measuring your worth through her attention, you reclaimed something essential, your internal authority. When you stopped seeing yourself as someone waiting to be chosen, you became someone who chooses. That internal repositioning is everything. You no longer approached interactions hoping to be enough. You approached them knowing you already were. And that knowing changes how you speak, how you listen, how you walk away, and how you stay. It removes the quiet anxiety that used to sit beneath your words. This is why she felt the shift so strongly. You weren't trying to impress her anymore. You weren't trying to win her back. You weren't trying to prove that you had changed. You simply were different. And authenticity is unmistakable. It carries a calm confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't rush. It doesn't cling. It doesn't explain. It allows. When you value yourself, you no longer fear loss the same way. Loss becomes information, not a threat to your identity. You understand that connection is mutual, not something to be secured at any cost. That understanding creates emotional stability. And emotional stability is grounding. It makes others feel less powerful over you, and paradoxically, more drawn to you. She didn't come back because you waited patiently in silence. She came back because when she looked again, she saw someone who no longer needed her validation to stand tall, someone whose life had structure, direction, and self-respect, someone whose attention felt intentional, not automatic. That version of you was unfamiliar and compelling. What changed most was your relationship with absence. Absence no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like space. Space to grow, to reflect, to choose yourself without resentment. And because you were no longer afraid of being alone, you stopped acting from fear. You stopped reaching for reassurance. You stopped negotiating your boundaries. That emotional self-sufficiency radiates strength. This is the part people often miss. She didn't return because you moved on visibly. She returned because you moved on internally. Because when someone senses that they are no longer the center of your self-worth, they experience you differently. There's respect where there used to be familiarity. There's curiosity where there used to be certainty. There's attraction where there used to be comfort. You didn't harden your heart. You grounded it. You didn't close yourself off. You opened inward. And that inward shift changed the energy you brought into every interaction. It made you steady, present, unshaken. She didn't come back because you needed her. She came back because you didn't.